God bless you, America.
Woo! So do we believe that we can say to that mountain, move, and it will move? Do we believe that any place and any time and any space in our lives, when we activate that principle and we do it from the foundation of love and the principles of love, that that power is mighty? We are here, friends, not to live ordinary lives, but to live extraordinary lives, lives of demonstration, lives of faith, lives of power. And we don't always get to choose what that looks like on the outside, but we can always choose how we show up for it on the inside. I was around the area after Hurricane Katrina. I was invited into that area. I've shared this before. And I was on the road traveling, doing ministry, guest speaking, guest music. And at the time I came through, and around the time that I was circulating, when Hurricane Katrina hit, I gave a talk called Biblical Proportions. And it was all about how sometimes things hit us, sometimes things happen in life that don't seem small. They seem like they're the magnitude of the Bible stories, the stories of biblical proportion. We're still experiencing that same energy, are we not? That when we're present and looking out at the world around us, it seems like there are things happening at the scale of biblical proportions. We're holding our brothers and sisters on the East Coast after Hurricane Sandy in prayer, knowing that the power that is in their lives and the power that is in their hearts is going to reflect in the power that is running through their homes as quickly as possible. But what I know is that one thing happens when we experience the outer world seeming like the magnitude of biblical proportions is right here, right now. What I know is that it provides the opportunity to show up with love of biblical proportions. It gives the opportunity for us to show up with faith. Faith enough to move mountains. And that when this type of love and this type of brotherhood, this type of spiritual infrastructure through human beings is expressed and supportive, we recognize that we don't live in an unfriendly universe, that we live in a friendly universe. That we live in a friendly universe full of love and support. And though we might have systems or structures within our community, within our framework, and even within our own lives that may feel like they're not working, that there is something stronger than that all of the time, harmonizing, healing, radiating, binding, and joining us together. And when we see it demonstrated in others and in ourselves, when we have the opportunity to practice it, I believe that we recognize who and whose we are. We recognize that we have no limits, that we actually go beyond the boundaries of our physical beings in this physical universe. And we tap into another way of living and deeper values in life, spiritual values, values that transcend form. Once we really recognize that we live in a friendly universe, we actually become changed within, don't we? We actually shift. We begin to live from a different place. William James said, "Wherever you are, it is your friends who make your world." Wherever you are, it is your friends who make your world. Isn't that interestingly true? that most of our experience is made up of those who we bring close to us. But then when we step out of the idea of friends being limited to those we know closely and those we say we love, and we begin to see all of those around us as friends, a mystical experience happens in this lifetime. And we have our principles, our 5 unity principles that ground us and guide us into this living as if no one else is an other, as if no one else on the planet is not me. And they guide us into that through these ideas that there is one power and one presence. It is God, is omnipotence itself, that there is nothing against that power, and that it is purely good. Good with a capital G, as in unconditional, overarching, overall divine good. Then the second principle, which is that idea that within everyone is that divine spark, is that God essence, is that Christed consciousness, is that enlightened state of awareness, is that universal mind access point, that when it is open and when it is activated and when it is utilized, it revitalizes this entire being body we call self. And then there's the idea that our thoughts create our reality, that our thoughts and our emotions, this field makes a difference and we participate. And then we have the idea of the map. I call it the map: meditation, affirmation, and prayer. Our action steps, that when we meditate, when we affirm our good, and when we pray, we access the highest expressions. And then the fifth step is action. That knowing these ideas is not enough, we must activate them. That it is ours to act on the truth we know to the greatest degree we know it. And those 5 principles help us in the practice of living and creating, generating a friendly universe that loves us, supports us, and wants us to win. I didn't make that up. That was Louise Hay. But when you hear something like that, it sticks with you, doesn't it? Those are our principles to activate a world that loves us, supports us, and wants us to win. I recently got a text from a friend who was in an airport in Washington, D.C. In that airport, she actually ended up sitting next to Charlotte Shelton, waiting for her flight. Charlotte Shelton, if you don't know, is the head of Unity Village here on grounds. And she sent me this text of her day at the airport and processing, thinking, ideating. And I got to the end of this text, and I got teary-eyed. I got to the end of this text, and it said this: the flight was overbooked. The flight coming back here, and she was supposed to get in about 10 o'clock at night. So you know what that's like when you're at the airport and it's a late night and you just want to get home. She said the flight was supposed to get in at about 10 o'clock. Our flight was oversold, so I volunteered to stay behind so someone else could go. I figured my husband could use the voucher at some time to visit me, and I can daydream. I can daydream about how that person who got to go to Kansas City had a life-altering experience because they got to board the plane. Like he met the love of his life, or the relative who picked him up at the airport agreed on the way home to donate one of their kidneys to him. Who knows? That's a beautiful blessing, pressed out in a seemingly plain environment. A seeming environment where it looks like not much is going on, but something big went on. Because there is someone living the principles and knowing that everything can have an impact, and knowing that when we stand in our blessing, it makes a difference. And that we engage in visioning, and when we do, fruits of blessing flow forth. It's precious to be on the unity path. And there are ways we can see it evidenced and demonstrated when we witness each other, no? I had this idea at a luncheon with a minister friend. We were talking, and came up with this. What would you pick if you were to write Unity's sixth principle? If you were to write the sixth principle, what would you make it? What would it look like? You could turn it around to think, when I see a unity person, I know it's a unity person. I know it's a real hardcore, I like to say, unity person. Or when I see someone waking up to the unity path, I can recognize it because this is what I start to see happening. What might that sixth principle be? If unity is based on the idea of co-creating a world that works for all, of beholding the divine presence within each other, of looking at the law of mind action, acting on our truths because knowing them is not enough, what could be a sixth principle? I want to share with you a few quotes. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. I believe that we are solely responsible for our choices, and we have to accept the consequences of every deed, word, and thought throughout our lifetime. Eleanor Roosevelt. In the long run, we shape our lives, and we shape ourselves. The process never ends until we die, and the choices that we make are ultimately our responsibility. Marilyn Ferguson. At some point early in our lives, we decide just how conscious we wish to be. We establish a threshold of awareness. We choose how stark a truth we are willing to admit into consciousness, how readily we will examine the contradictions in our lives and our beliefs, how deeply we wish to penetrate. Our brains can censor what we see and hear. We can filter reality to suit our level of courage. At every crossroads, we can make the choice, again, for greater or lesser awareness. And the last, from Marcus Aurelius. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but your own estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. I'd say the clear mark of a unity person is accountability. You recognize that when you see truth students that have been around the block over and over again, and you recognize it when you see a new truth student. The level of accountability for their own experience and their own life is immense. It is admirable. It can be jaw-dropping. I have had people even write me letters years after an experience that I either let go of or wasn't really triggered by, blessed and released, but wrote me letters saying, I just got it. This is what was going on for me. This is the framework. This is what I did in my mind and in my consciousness. This is the mess that I created from it. This is what I was thinking, experiencing, and this is my aha. And I want you to know I'm free of it. You may not have even known that I went there, but I'm free of it. The clear mark of a unity person. The clear mark of a practitioner of truth, right? Have you had someone do this with you that you may not even be aware, but we know when we engage in community that we grow all over each other. And that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing because when we have the quickening of awareness that brings about this deep sense of accountability, we recognize that when we go back and have these maybe clean up conversations or maybe have these epiphanies that we share, it's not about guilt or shame or blame. It's not about making the systems out there in our world wrong. It's about waking up to another idea, and it's celebrated because the idea that blesses me is the idea that blesses you. Because the moment I was able to be with myself and presence myself in a way that brought me out of drawing from the collective subconscious mind, the quiet, sleepy patterns of separation and illusion, the moment I was able, or that it was able through me, to lift up, to transform, and to become shifted in a way that I am now drawing forth from the field of God mind, is a moment simply to be celebrated. And it's a moment that when you see a new truth student, they can't stop talking about it, can they? I thought there was a cage around me, and then I realized there was no cage at all. I thought there was something that limited me, and I realized there was no limit at all. We're not here to be expressions of limited beings. We're here to express our unlimited nature. And when we get that, we recognize and we realize that things that seem to take us off center, things that seem to be out of harmony, are simply opportunities of biblical proportions to recognize and activate God consciousness in a way that we may not have been aware of before. One of my favorite scenes in movies of all times is a scene from Cold Mountain. And in the film, Ada was talking to Ruby. And I have to edit it a little bit for Sunday morning. But they were standing in the rain and they were discussing war and the problems and why the world was having these problems. And Ada got very energetic. And she said, every piece of this is man's creation. That's my word for what she said, creation. They call this war a cloud over the land, but they made the weather and then they stand in the rain and say, bleep, it's raining. It's that moment. It's that moment for each and every one of us that we have when we go, ah. Joe Dispenza says change is to think and act differently in the same circumstances. To think and act differently in the same circumstances. We are a vessel through which the universe, through which light, through which spirit is exploring itself to greater and greater degrees of awakened awareness. Albert Ellis says, the best years of your life are the ones which you decide that your problems are your own. You do not blame them on your mother, the ecology, or the president. You realize that you control your own destiny. Do we believe in that truth? And are we willing to practice it with an unending faith that can move mountains? Are we willing to practice it in biblical proportions? Are we willing to practice it in a way that goes beyond even what our eyes might show us is the seeming truth or the seeming reality or the seeming limitations, and recognize that we truly do live in a limitless universe and it is ours to create? And by that self-accountability, when we practice it so beautifully within us, then we lift each other up and we are not heavy. Then we lift our world up, and it is not heavy. It's about radical accountability, to be accountable in a world of paradox and move from the individual or the collective subconscious into that field of superconscious mind and to witness the consciousness expanding. In Hebrews 10:24, it says, "Let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds." Let us spur one another on. Because when we live this life of biblical proportions, when we live our birthright, and we come from this space, not of being discouraged, but of being lifted up and being the aspect of self that not only lifts the self up, but lifts others up, there is a whole new global energy of accountability that is divine. We are here to live and to share a life and a love of biblical proportions. Namaste.